So good to be with you guys. Okay, so let's start with a little bit of exercise. Stretch your right hand out this way to make sure you don't punch anyone. Right? Okay, now make a fist first. Okay, move it about. You're feeling the energy, feeling your hand loose. Yeah. Now, what I want to do as you're moving your hand is move it to your chin. Move it to your chin. Is this your chin, Astrid? It's fascinating, right? Like when you're doing something and you're hearing words, it's kind of hard to concentrate on both. So even though I said move it to your chin, because I did this, some of you are like, my chin. But listening is hard. Listening is hard, especially when there's so much going through your mind and so much going on in your lives. And actually part of what makes us human beings, part of what makes us come alive as human beings is to be able to listen. To be able to listen well and to kind of take in what's around us. Watching my kids is a fascinating thing because they ain't so good at listening. I mean, literally, the other day I was just observing Mila and Judah playing, and they're at this age where they've not yet learned to listen to one another. So Mila wants to play in a certain way, and so she'll be telling Judah, this is how you play, and as the older one, she kind of feels like she has the authority, and she's kind of telling Judah how to play, but he doesn't want to play that way. He wants to play another way. And so she's talking, trying to overpower him, and this is literally what Judah's doing. He's like, yada. It's like, I'm not listening to you. I don't want to. and just watching them was fascinating. So I go to both of them, I put my hand on both of them and go, when you speak to one another, you can't speak over each other at the same time. Otherwise you can't listen to one another, right? So I said to Mila, first, you talk, and Julia, you listen, try and listen to what she's saying, and then you respond, and Mila, keep quiet. And the strange thing is it's not just children. We all do that. We somehow not able to, power's gone off. I'll use my voice. Oh, there we go. We're somehow not able to listen well. So not just listen, but to listen well. And I wonder if you've ever thought, why? You just need to watch TV, and people are not listening to one another. I mean, I was watching Piers Morgan Uncensored, right? Now, if you know Piers Morgan, he's like Les is like, he's very, he talks a lot, he's quite abrasive, outspoken, and so, because South Africa has been doing the rounds in the news, he decided to get on a few South Africans. So Piers Morgan got on Gareth Cliff, and he got on Dan Corder, who does a podcast, and he got on a journalist from Newsroom Africa or whatever, and there were four of them in the panel, and just listening to them talking, what's weird was that they were almost saying the same thing, but because they weren't listening to one another, they were just, they were talking to one another and getting annoyed with one another. They just approached the thing in different ways, but they were actually saying the same thing. And I've learned over the years that, when we don't listen well, we actually don't become fully alive. Because every human being wants to be heard, right? Because you know that somehow in you there's intrinsic value because you're made in the image of God. And so if you've had a hard life and kind of life squashed you down, you kind of feel like I'm inconsequential in the world. No one cares about me. No one cares about my story. No one wants to listen to me. And there's a woman in the Bible who wasn't even part of God's chosen people at the time. But what's amazing is that God chose to listen to her. And the woman is Hagar. And Hagar is a slave of Abraham and Sarai. And God promised Abraham and Sarai, he said, I'll give you a son, through you all the nations of the earth will be blessed. He said to Abraham, look up, and if you can count the stars, that's how many inheritance you will have. So there's a promise. But the thing with God, I'm sure you've noticed by now, is that the time between the promise and the fulfillment takes a while. It's not like it's going to happen tomorrow or the next day or even the next year. So in this sense, it took 45 years. And so Abraham and Sarai resorted to what was the custom of the day, which was that you could bear children through the maidservants or the slave that you had, right? So Sarai, and I can imagine the frustration as a couple. They're already quite old, and they're like, "Oh, God promised, let's get going, let's try and have kids," and they're not able to. And for many women, that's a pain that they have to carry, that they're trying and trying and they're not able to, And so I don't know what is going on in them, but I know that it might have been a struggle where God made this promise, but Sarai's not able to conceive, and so Sarai was, maybe the promise was through one of her maidservants, maybe it was through Hagar, and Abraham goes, oh, maybe, I don't know, but maybe, let's give it a go, So obviously Hagar is, young and she's fertile, and she falls pregnant from Abram, and she gives birth. And then Sarai is now getting a little bit jealous because here's this younger woman, she's able to fall pregnant, and so there's animosity between the two women. And so eventually Hagar can't deal with this anymore. I mean, we're not going to go into details here, but she can't deal with this anymore because it feels like she's just been used. It feels like her body has just been used to produce a child for Abram, and there's no sense of, understanding or care for her. And so eventually she runs away into the desert with her son Ishmael, and she is absolutely a broken woman. And this is how God comes to her, and I just love this because He comes to her in in Genesis 16, and He speaks to her through the angel of the Lord. So we don't know obviously if this was God or Jesus, pre-incarnate Jesus, but He comes to her through the angel, and He says in Genesis 16:11, and the angel also said, "You are now pregnant and will give birth to a son, and you are to name him Ishmael," which means God hears, right? Which means God hears, for the Lord has heard your cry of distress. The Lord has heard your cry of distress. And the way you relate to God will be, He's a God who hears. He's a God who sees you in your pain. He's a God who sees you in your distress. He's a God who listens to you. He's a God who listens to you. Man, I don't know about you, but that really excites me about God. It excites me about God because I think so often we feel like if God does not change our circumstances, that means He's not hearing us, and He's not listening to our cry and our pain and our distress. But maybe we've misunderstood what listening and hearing is about. Maybe all we want is for someone who's bigger and stronger and mightier than we are to identify with our pain. Maybe that's what will actually keep us going, right? Maybe that's what will actually make us take the next step and then the next step. And I think sometimes we misunderstand God because we think God may be disappointed with us because things are not going well, but maybe God doesn't necessarily want to fix our circumstances, but He wants to fix us. Right? And we long for certain things, we yearn for certain things, maybe we're not yet ready for those things. And one of the best ways to love people is to show them that they are seen and heard. Like, I have no doubt about that. That's one of the best ways you can love people. That's why we're kicking off this Connecting in Community venture in the next 2 weeks or so, because as we go into one another's homes, we want to know that this wider church family, this wider church body sees you and it hears you, it understands you. I mean, today I was just talking to someone and talking about connecting in community, and they're like, "Oh, we've been through a hard time. We don't know if we want people to come in." There's that sense that I don't want people to see me the way I am because I myself don't feel like I like the way I am at the moment, But God says, I want to see you just you are, and I hear you just as you are. The best way to connect to others is to listen well with them, to them. That for me is the best way to connect with people, is just to listen well. So today I just want to flesh out what that looks like a little bit. Hopefully it'll help us as we connect in community. James 1:19 says this. It says, be slow to listen and quick to speak. Oh, Mike's listening because Mike knows that's not what it says, right? No, it says be slow to speak and quick to listen. And some people say, yeah, that's because you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so you should hear more than... I think it means more than that, I think it means that before we're able to express what's in our hearts, before we're able to help someone well, before we're able to encourage someone well, maybe the best thing to do is to listen to them first. Right? Maybe the best thing to do is hear their story. Maybe the best thing to do is to walk in their shoes for a little bit. But how do you do that? So, I read a book called Super Communicators a couple of years ago. I found it really, really helpful. So, I read it on your behalf, so you don't have to read. Thank you very much. So, the guy, he talks about what it means to have good conversations with people. Right? And I found that so helpful. And this is what he said, right? In any conversation between people, whether you are in a board meeting, whether you are in a ministry meeting, whether it's husband and wife, whether it's, in any kind of conversation, there are practically 3 types of conversation that happen in the one setting, right? And part of the skill being developed is to try and understand what type of conversation it is, right? So the first type of conversation is this. It's what you call a practical conversation, right? So it's asking the question, what's this really about? Right? So it has to do with logistics and details and things like that. I don't have to give you examples, like if you're sitting in an office with your colleagues, you're talking about details, talking about how to do things, Husband and wives do that as well. Like this is a logistical conversation. We're talking about the week, talking about each other's schedules and this and that. But here's the fascinating thing. No conversation has only one of these things happening, right? You generally have all 3 at once. The second one is, for me, the most important one is what you call emotional conversations. How do we feel? How do we feel? Now, the fascinating thing is, I've noticed this when I'm doing marriage counseling, but also in relationship to my wife. We've been married for 10 years. You'd think I'm good at this by now, but I still have a long way to go, When Kirsty was working full-time, as a designer, it was a very brutal industry, and, wake up early, drive, work the whole day, come back late, and all of that. And often she'd come home frustrated and just feeling angst about her job because she just didn't have a lot of freedom to do her job well, and she had work colleagues who didn't really see her, and gave unreasonable deadlines, all these kind of things. So she would come home and vent, literally, she'd vent on me. And what I should pay attention to when she's venting is that she's actually expressing her emotions, right? She's telling me that she's feeling either angry, or she's feeling frustrated, or she's feeling sad. But me as a guy, I'm not listening to emotions. I'm trying to have the practical conversations. I'm like, okay, well, how do we fix this? Let's get your diary out. Let's see if we can schedule this in a way that, do you need me to talk to your boss? So I come with you to work and give him, so I'm trying to fix this practically, when in that moment she needs to connect with me emotionally. She just needs me to affirm what she's feeling and tell her that it's going to be okay. Right? The third type of conversation that we have with one another is what we call a social conversation. Right? So it's who we are in relation to the world, right? So we all have various roles: mother, father, brother, sister, husband, wife, uncle, auntie, friend, whatever. This is our role in the world. Social conversations and how we connect. And in any conversation, you have these 3 happening at the same time. So the best listener is able to identify which one is happening at that particular point in time. Now, next time you're at a braai, just try this out. Next time you're at a braai, just listen to the conversations. People are either talking about, let me give you an example. Like, I had a small braai a few weeks ago for my birthday, and, it was a great time up until the topic of Donald Trump came up. And I was like, So I'm just sitting here. I'm just sitting here watching South Africans talk about the president of another country who's like thousands of miles away, and then you can see the ones who lean more towards him and the ones who are completely anti-Trump. And I'm looking at this, I'm like, this is not a practical conversation, because emotions are being, are coming out, and so in those moments, like, people are actually not listening to what one another is saying, because actually Trump is not the issue here. Something about him has triggered something in their emotions, right? So these are skills we learn over time, as you relate to one another. So hopefully that's something you take with you as you go into each other's homes. It's just to learn to listen to the type of conversation that's happening, to try and just discern what the other person is actually saying. Because Proverbs 10:19 says, "Too much talk leads to sin. So be sensible and keep your mouth shut." I mean, the Bible is as blunt as ever. Often people don't like reading other stuff because they say, "Oh no, other books are just so blunt. I want to go to the scriptures. I feel good about myself." Really? Well, there's a lot of things in the scriptures that are not so. Let me read it again. Too much talk leads to sin. Be sensible and keep your mouth shut. Proverbs 10:19. Right? So just listen. We listen to what people say with our ears. SK saying, is that for husbands? I don't know. It's up to you guys. But we listen to what people say with our ears, but we listen to what they feel with our hearts. Can we say it again? We listen to what people say with our ears, but we listen to what they feel with our hearts. With our hearts. Because the heart, believe it or not, is both a seeing and a listening organ that God has given us. So what we need to do is just pay attention to the emotion behind the words. Pay attention to the emotion behind the words, and not necessarily the words. So I want to move on to understanding. We've spoken about listening. I just love this word, understanding, because often when you speak to people and they say, "I hear you, but," so in those moments they're actually not hearing you, because you can see they're so anxious to tell you what they think about what you just said. They're like, "I've got an opinion, and I just can't wait for you to stop talking so that I'll give you my opinion." So that's why these days I try and consciously try and refrain from saying that, "I hear you, but," because the thing about understanding is not so much trying to decipher what they're saying, but trying to hear the heart from where it comes from, right? Like, what is actually going on in another person that they're saying something and they're saying it in a specific way. And so the word understanding actually literally means to stand among. The word understanding means to stand among. Or another way of saying it is, understanding means to stand in the midst of. To stand in the midst of. Friends, I want to tell you this morning that the greatest act of understanding, the greatest act of empathy, is when God became man. That's the greatest act of understanding and empathy in the world, when God became man, because God literally took on human flesh and stood amongst us. Some people will not agree with this, but God being God still did not know quite what the human experience was until He Himself became human. That's a profound thought. I mean, that's why Philippians 2 says, Jesus had to give something up. He had to give up His divine privileges and all the things that he had as God and take on human flesh. That's a profound thought, right? To think that God Himself did not get the human experience until he became human. That's why he needed to become human, so that he could be the perfect and all-encompassing Savior. So I find it so beautiful that God would humble himself so that he could stand amongst us, stand in the midst of us, and understand us. God becoming man. That's why I love John 1:14. It's so beautiful, you know, where John says, so the Word became human and made his home amongst us. There's that word. He made his home amongst us. He stood in the midst of us. And that's why I can confidently stand here today and tell you that God understands. God listens and he understands. That should be such a comforting thought, that God who has all the power in the universe to change our circumstances, sometimes chooses to change it and sometimes he doesn't. When he doesn't, it doesn't mean that he doesn't love you. It doesn't mean that he's not for you. It means that he gets you, and if he gets you and understands you, it means that he knows what you need to move forward. Right? It means he knows what it needs for you to experience more life. And so if he doesn't change your circumstance, it means that's not what you need right now. Right? That's not what you need right now. And so just the fact that he gets me, he gets what it means to be met. He gets what it means to have been born where I was. He gets what it means for me to have the kind of parents I did. He gets what it means for me to have the struggles that I did in school. That alone is such a mind-blowing thought. And so part of spending time in one another's homes is to actually start getting what it means to be you, right? Because often, you know, you're one way with one another here, but you're quite different at home, you know? You actually get to see the real you at home, unless you're still at home putting up false pretenses, you know? But that's what I'm kind of hoping as we connect in community, is that you get to see what it means to be you in your home, what it means to be you in the journey that you've walked in your life. Because we're not just going into one another's homes, we hopefully going into one another's hearts. That's the whole purpose of this connecting community, that we're not just going into one another's homes, we want to go into one another's hearts. Understand one another's world. I mean, you know, when we drive on the road, and there's people handing out pamphlets, like you want to be nice to them because, you know, they have a certain amount of pamphlets they have to give out, right? A day. But most of us keep our windows closed, or we look the other way, we don't acknowledge, and, you know, so, you know, I used to just take every pamphlet I wrote, but then I found I dirtied my car because now my car is full of pamphlets. But I've handed out pamphlets before. You know, when I was a student, you would just pick up any job you could, you know, just to earn some money. And so I've handed out pamphlets before, and guys, it's hard, because you really feel no one notices me. You're standing and giving pamphlets and no one looks at me. So now I know what it means to be in that person's shoe, because I've had a little bit of their lived experience, standing under the hot sun, trying to give out pamphlets that no one, even if no one doesn't want to take, and at least if you just roll on the window and just greet them and say, whatever, and maybe give them a bottle of water, that at least acknowledges that they're seen, you know? I guess why I'm sharing this is because I never knew what it was to stand inside around and hand out pamphlets until I did it myself. Then I thought, sure, even doing this for a couple of hours was like draining, hard work, you know? And so as you enter into one another's worlds, that's my prayer, that's my hope, that's my desire. So I just want to end with this. I think we struggle to listen because there is a disconnect. And part of the disconnect in our lives of experience is that we actually disconnected from our own hearts, from what's going on inside of us, you know? And we spoke about this last week as well, but the disconnect for me was, like I said last week, I didn't listen to Matt, who was telling me that I struggle with shame, that I'm someone who was searching for significance and value. You know, that I was someone who was wounded as a child in various ways, and therefore I needed to pay attention to that. So our way of coping with our wounds, our broken self, is to create a false self, is to create an identity that makes us look good. You know, and for me it was ministry. For me it was like, since my mid-20s, it's like ministry, you know, teach the Bible, disciple people, get involved. I mean, I was telling Dan, because Dan was like, hey, there's a church up the road here. And I said to Dan, I was a member of that church for 14 years. In fact, I kind of lived there. People knew that I was there more than I was at home. You know, in fact, I only ever went home to sleep. You know, because they had a youth center, and it was very comfortable there. So I just spent most of my days there. And, you know, and from there, it just went from there. You know, and this thing became my identity, but I was not listening to myself and the pain that was in me. And so when you struggle to stop and reflect and listen to the pain that's in you, you won't be able to listen to others as well, let alone God. Let alone God, you know. And so, let's spend a little bit of quiet time at the moment before we carry on. But often, you know, I mean, you know, we value preaching, we value guys who speak from the front and all of that, but often we learn most actually when we have one-on-one conversations with one another. That things tend to stick with us, you know. With a recent 412 Equip, you know, there was obviously a lot of talks over those few days, but I can sort of tell you what the talks were about, but I can't remember or regurgitate any of those talks. Or what I do remember is a one-on-one conversation I had with someone. It was an elder at another 412 church. We had this conversation. I said to him, yeah, man, I've just come back from sabbatical, you know, like I feel live, I feel energized, you know. And I said to him, some people said to me that it looks like I feel light, you know, it looks like I feel light. And he said to me, you know what, I heard the saying once from someone, and I'll never forget it. And he said the saying was, when you live in the light, you feel right. When you live in the light, you feel light. And those words are like, oh my goodness. Those words I heard a few weeks ago, and I have never forgotten them. And it came from a conversation I had with someone. You know, so going forward, I know that if I feel heavy, it means I'm not living in the light. As simple as that. You know, because if the light of God is permeating through me, you feel light, you know. So I just mentioned that because I learned so much. That one sentence that guy said in the conversation meant more to me than all the talks that happened in that conference. Let's close our eyes for a moment.